Imagine for a moment that you're living 40,000 years ago. There are no hospitals, no medicines, and no social media to reach out for help. If you get injured, fall ill, or simply don't fit in with the others, your fate seems sealed. At least, that's the story we've always been told about our prehistoric ancestors. But get ready, because what we're going to uncover today will completely change everything you thought you knew about the past. Modern science has revealed something incredible. Our ancestors were not the brutal beasts we've seen depicted in movies. They were compassionate, empathetic beings, filled with a love for their community that should make us, the civilized folks of the 21st century, feel ashamed. This is the story of how care and affection among humans is not a modern invention of civilization. It's something we've carried in our blood since the dawn of time. It's the story of how our ancestors showed that being human means, above all else, caring for one another. For decades, scientists and historians painted a very misleading picture of our ancestors. They told us they were primitive, violent, and lived like wild animals, that life was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, as the philosopher Thomas Hobbes put it. They suggested that care and compassion were luxuries we could only afford after inventing agriculture and cities. But in recent decades, archaeologists have been unearthing evidence that tells an entirely different story. And we're not talking about speculation or pretty theories. We're talking about bones, tools, and archaeological sites that reveal the truth about how our ancestors really lived. In France, they discovered the remains of a Neanderthal man who lived 50,000 years ago. This man was born with a spinal deformity that caused him constant pain and difficulty walking. According to the traditional view, this man would have been abandoned or eliminated by his tribe. But scientists found something surprising. This man lived to be 40 years old, a remarkably old age for that time. How is this possible? The answer is simple. His community cared for him throughout his life. They provided him with food, protected him, and brought him along when they moved. Even though he couldn't hunt or gather like the others, his tribe decided that his life was valuable. In Spain, they found evidence of a teenager with Down syndrome who lived 530,000 years ago. This young person required daily special care, help with eating, walking, and performing basic tasks. And once again, his community took care of him until he died of natural causes at the age of 12. These are not isolated cases. Around the world, archaeologists are discovering evidence of individuals with disabilities, serious injuries, and illnesses who were cared for by their communities for years, even decades. If this information is as surprising to you as it is to me, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more incredible stories that will change your perspective on humanity. But care in prehistoric times wasn't limited to those with disabilities. It was a complete system of mutual support that encompassed the entire community, from the youngest to the oldest. Children were the most precious treasure of these communities, not only because they represented the future, but because they were genuinely loved and protected. We have found toys carved from bone and stone, small necklaces specially made for children, and tiny tools used to teach them the skills they would need as adults. But what's most impressive is how they treated the elders. In an era where survival was paramount, you might think that the elderly would be a burden, but it was quite the opposite. The elderly were revered as living libraries, guardians of wisdom and experience that could save lives. An elder who had lived for 60 years had seen droughts, floods, brutal winters, and knew exactly what to do in each situation. They knew which plants healed ailments, which were poisonous, and where to find water during shortages. This wisdom was invaluable. Scientists have found evidence of elders living into their 70s and 80s at times when the average life expectancy was around 30 years. This was only possible because their communities actively cared for them. They provided the best food, protected them from the cold, and allowed them to rest while others did the heavy lifting. They've also discovered something fascinating about the care of the sick. In archaeological sites around the world, they've found prehistoric hospitals, special caves where the injured and sick were taken. These places had constant fires for warmth, easy access to water, and evidence that natural medicines were prepared there. Pregnant women received special care. They had different diets, lighter workloads, and the support of the entire community during childbirth. Scientists have found evidence of specialized midwives who assisted in births and cared for mothers during recovery. But how do we know all this? How can scientists read such detailed stories in bones and stones that are thousands of years old? The answer lies in modern forensic science applied to archaeology. Bones tell us incredible stories. When someone has a fracture, the bone heals in a very specific way. If you find a bone with a well-healed fracture, you know that person received care for weeks or months. If the fracture is poorly healed, you know the person had to keep working and moving while the bone healed. Scientists have found perfectly healed fractures in bones that are 100,000 years old, fractures so complicated that the person would have needed complete rest for months to heal properly. This would only have been possible if their community was fully supporting them during that time. They can also detect diseases in ancient bones: arthritis, osteoporosis, infections, congenital deformities. And in many cases they find evidence that these individuals lived for years with these conditions, made possible only by the constant care of their community. The tools also tell us stories. They found special tools designed for people with disabilities: longer handles for those who couldn't bend down, special grips for deformed hands, and modified tools so that those with mobility issues could use them. The diet also reveals secrets. By analyzing food remains and bones, scientists can determine who ate what. They've discovered that in many prehistoric communities, older adults and the sick received the best portions of food: more meat, more fat, more nutrients. Burial sites provide another fascinating source of information. The way they buried their dead speaks volumes about how they valued each individual. Elaborate graves have been found for people with disabilities, the elderly, and children, showing that all lives were valued in these communities. If you're fascinated by how modern science can read these stories from the past, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more mind-blowing content. But care wasn't only expressed during times of illness or crisis. It was part of the daily life of these communities. It was a complete system of mutual support that functioned like a social safety net, but based on genuine love rather than legal obligations. Child rearing was the responsibility of the entire community, not just the parents. Scientists have found evidence that children were cared for by multiple adults: aunts, grandparents, neighbors, and even older teenagers. This created family bonds that went beyond blood ties. When someone was injured during hunting or gathering, they immediately became a priority for the entire community. There were no health insurance policies or hospitals, but there was something better: a network of people who genuinely cared for your well-being. Researchers have found evidence of healing rituals that combined practical medicine with emotional support. They used medicinal plants, massages, and relaxation techniques, but they also sang, told stories, and held ceremonies to uplift the spirits of the sick. Food was shared systematically. It wasn't just occasional generosity, but an organized system where skilled hunters shared with those who had bad luck. Successful gatherers helped those who found nothing, and there was always something set aside for the most vulnerable. During harsh winters or times of scarcity, communities came together even more. They shared shelters, pooled resources, and looked after one another. Scientists found evidence of groups that survived entire seasons thanks to this cooperation. They also had systems in place to care for mental health. Rituals, ceremonies, music, and storytelling were not just entertainment. They served as group therapies that helped process traumas, fears, and losses. They understood that mental health was just as important as physical health. Can you imagine what our modern society would be like if we had this level of mutual care? Do you think we've lost something fundamental in our journey toward civilization? And one of the most profound expressions of prehistoric care can be found in how they treated their dead. Funerary rituals were not just religious ceremonies, but expressions of love and respect for each community member. Around the world, archaeologists have found burials that show extraordinary care: bodies placed in comfortable positions as if they were asleep, surrounded by their favorite belongings, tools, and objects that held significance in their lives. But the most surprising discovery was the same level of care in the burials of people with disabilities. A woman with dwarfism, buried with the same dignity as a great hunter. A child with deformities surrounded by toys and necklaces. This indicates that these communities valued people for who they were, not for what they could do. Scientists have found evidence that the bodies of the dead were cared for days before burial. They were washed, groomed, and dressed in their finest clothes. It was a farewell process that helped the community process the loss. They have also found evidence that people returned to visit the graves. They left food, flowers, and personal items. This suggests that care continued even after death, indicating that the connection with loved ones was stronger than death itself. Group burials are particularly moving. Entire families have been found buried together, arms entwined, as if they wanted to continue caring for each other in the afterlife. Couples buried embracing, parents holding their children in their arms. In some sites, there is evidence that they built monuments to remember the dead. These were not just markings in the ground, but elaborate structures that required the work of the entire community. This signifies that honoring the dead was a collective priority. Funerary rituals also served to teach children about the importance of care. They participated in ceremonies, helped prepare the body, and learned that caring for others was the most important value of their community. Isn't it incredible that our ancestors, without universities or philosophy books, understood something so profound about the value of each human life? Perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of these discoveries is that they compel us to rethink everything we thought we knew about human evolution. For a long time, scientists believed that survival of the fittest was the main rule of evolution. But now we know that survival of the most cooperative was equally important. Mutual care was not just a nice trait in our ancestors, it was a crucial evolutionary advantage that helped us survive and thrive as a species. Communities that looked after each other had a higher chance of weathering crises. Scientists have calculated that a person with a disability living to 40 years old in prehistoric times represented a community investment of thousands of hours of care. This only made sense if that individual contributed something valuable to the community: knowledge, wisdom, special skills, or simply their presence and companionship. This tells us that our ancestors understood something we sometimes forget, that a person's value isn't measured solely by their economic productivity. They valued diversity, experience, and the different perspectives that each individual could bring. Care was also a form of social security. When you cared for someone else, you created a debt of gratitude that could save your life later on. It was a system of reciprocity that worked in the long run. Scientists have also discovered that the most caring communities were also the most innovative. The time and energy saved by not having to constantly fight over resources could be dedicated to inventing new tools, developing new techniques, and exploring new ideas. If you're excited to discover how our ancestors teach us about true human nature, share this video with your friends and family. These stories are too important to keep to yourself. When we look back at our prehistoric ancestors, we realize they left us lessons that are more important today than ever. In a world where it sometimes feels like everyone is going their own way, where competition is valued more than cooperation, we can learn a lot from those who understood that caring for one another was the key to survival. The first lesson is that care is not weakness, it is strength. Our ancestors didn't survive because they were the strongest individuals, but because they knew how to build strong communities based on mutual support. The second lesson is that all lives have value regardless of limitations or differences. At a time when survival was paramount, our ancestors decided that no life was disposable. This should make us reflect on how we treat people with disabilities, the elderly, and the most vulnerable members of our society. The third lesson is that care is contagious. When a community is based on mutual care, it creates an environment where everyone feels safe, valued, and motivated to contribute. Care generates more care. They also taught us that care isn't just for special moments, it's a way of life. They didn't wait for someone to get sick to show affection. Caring was part of their daily routine, their way of relating to the world. They showed us that care encompasses both body and soul. They didn't just heal physical wounds, they also looked after the mental and emotional health of their community. They understood that we are complete beings who need well-being in all aspects. Finally, they taught us that care transcends even death. The love they felt for their loved ones didn't end when they passed away. It continued through rituals, memories, and teachings passed from generation to generation. And so, friends, when we think of our prehistoric ancestors, we can no longer view them as brutish, primitive beings living like animals. They were fully human, with the same capacity for love, compassion, and care that we possess today. In fact, in many ways, they surpassed us. They lived in communities where no one was left behind, where everyone had value, where mutual care was the norm, not the exception. They didn't have modern hospitals, but they had something we sometimes lose: the certainty that their community would care for them no matter what. This story reminds us that care is not a modern invention, but the very foundation of what it means to be human. It's in our genes, in our history, in our soul. When we care for others, we connect with the deepest essence of our humanity. The next time you see someone in need of help, remember your ancestors. They taught us that caring for others is not just the right thing to do, but what truly makes us human. In a world that sometimes seems to have lost compassion, we can find hope in knowing that care and love have been with us since the very beginning. And if our ancestors could create communities based on mutual care with nothing but stone tools and fire, then we can create a better world with all the tools we possess today. When care meant more than words, our ancestors showed us the way. Now it's our turn to follow their example.